let's dive in and do this thing. So, first thing that I want to do, of course, is kind of just walk us through the something's weird on my. There we go. Um, One thing that I want to do is just kind of walk through the basics, how to get around in the Excel window, um, because it's not. When you first open Excel up, it can look a little intimidating. I certainly understand that. And so I want to make sure y'all know how to get around inside that window. And that way, that way there's no cause, or, that way when I say, well, click on this thing, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So let's talk about the layout a little bit. First things first, let's just start at the top. So up here at the top, you'll see a number of things. In the middle here, you'll see the name of the file that I'm working on, part1.xlsx. And you'll see when I last changed it about an hour ago here. You won't always see that in all versions of Excel. I'm using the Office 365 version of Excel, which is the latest version. But almost all the stuff that we're going to be talking about throughout all 4 classes in the course is going to be applicable to pretty much any version of Excel. I'd say certainly from 2010 onward. So if you have even a reasonably recent version of Excel, you should be able to use pretty much all of what we're going to talk about. They have added recently a little search bar where you can search for a number of different things, different commands or features of Excel and help materials and all sorts of stuff. So that's pretty useful, but we're not going to touch much on that in this class since it's a relatively new feature. Over here at the top left is this little area called the Quick Access Toolbar. There is an autosave switch here. If I've stored my file on Microsoft OneDrive or on a SharePoint for work, then I can use this autosave feature to basically have Excel save my changes as I go. And that can be really useful sometimes because obviously sometimes you forget to save and that sort of thing. I have mine turned off though, because any changes that I make, I don't want to be permanent on this file because I'm going to use it next time I teach the class. But you can turn that on or off, whatever suits your purposes best. Next to that, of course, is just the save button. If I click on this, it's a little disk. If I click on that, that's just going to update my existing file with whatever changes I have made since the last time I saved my work. Or if it's a brand new file, it's going to trigger the save as function. Save as is basically, it'll ask you where you want to store your file, and it'll ask you what you want to call it. Once you've got that situated, then you'll just be able to click save to update the existing file. And next to that are 2 very useful buttons. These buttons exist because we're all human and we all make mistakes. So those are the undo and redo buttons. Basically, the undo button, when you click on it, just reverses whatever the last action was that you took. So if let's say you typed some information into a cell on your spreadsheet here, then clicking the undo button will just remove that information as though you hadn't typed it in. If you change the color of a cell, it'll change it back, and so on and so forth, just whatever the last action was that you took. If you make multiple mistakes in a row, and who among us hasn't done that, then you can click the undo button multiple times and it will step backwards. It'll undo the most recent action first, then the next most recent action, and then the next most recent action, etc. So that's really handy. But sometimes you make a mistake in hitting the undo button, or maybe you get a little excited and you hit the undo button too many times and you undo some work that you intended to keep. That's where the redo button next to this comes in. The redo button, helpfully, undoes your undoing. So if I say made 3 mistakes, but I clicked the undo button 5 times, then I can click redo twice and that'll get me to where I need to be. Basically, if you lose some work that you intended to keep by clicking undo, then you can use redo to get it back. The only thing about the redo button that you want to be careful with is if you use, or is you can only use the redo button as the next thing after the undo button. So if I click undo and then I make some other changes in my spreadsheets and then I go up and try to use the redo button, it's not going to work. It's like a time travel movie. You go back in time, you change the past, well, the future is not going to be the same anymore. And so if you travel forward to whatever the time was that you came from, things are going to be a little different. It's going to be the Lone Pine Mall instead of the Twin Pines Mall or whatever. So same deal with the redo button. If you click, if you want to use redo, you've got to make sure that you've got to make sure that it's the next thing you do after you hit undo. So that's and then one other thing about the quick access toolbar, it's got this little button right here, this little arrow. If I click on that, it gives me a menu where I can add additional options to my quick access toolbar. I can add any of the ones in this list, or I can click more commands, and almost any tool in all of Excel can be added to this quick access toolbar by clicking more commands and then finding the tool that you need. And then you just have a nice little shortcut to it up at the top. That can be really handy, but you don't want to go too crazy with it. Otherwise, it's going to be, you're just going to have too many buttons up there. If you find yourself digging for something a lot though, and you're like, I wish I could just do one click to get to that, then there's your ticket. Okay, so that's the top, the quick access toolbar. Underneath that is this area right here. This area is known as the ribbon. The ribbon is a design concept that Microsoft likes an awful lot. They use it in just almost all of their software at this point, including even Windows itself. So there's a lot of, you'll find this in a lot of different places. Basically, the idea with the ribbon is, the way I like to think of it is kind of like a tool chest. If you've been in, say, a wood shop or a mechanic's shop, somewhere like that, where they use a lot of different kinds of tools, they probably have one or more of those little drawers that have or tool chests that have drawers in them. Basically, the idea with that is, if you're organized and you keep your tools in the appropriate drawers, then when you need them, all you have to do is go to the right drawer, pull it out, grab the tool you need, and get back to work. You don't have to dig through a big old pile of tools to try and find the exact one you need. You can just grab the one you need and then go about your business. That's really useful because you don't want to be digging for hours and hours to find the right screwdriver or whatever. So the ribbon in Microsoft programs is kind of the same deal. Basically, you have all these little tabs, and those are like the drawers in the tool chest. So the Home tab contains tools that you use pretty regularly as you're working in Excel. We'll talk about a lot of this stuff throughout the course. But these particular tools are are things that you want pretty easy access to. Next to that is the Insert tab. If I click on the Insert tab, then it's going to change the set of tools that are available to me and show me, as you might imagine, tools or commands is actually what we say, that are specifically geared towards inserting things into your spreadsheets. And so you can put in a picture, you can add, a table, you can do charts and all kinds of things. So we'll touch on this in several of our sessions, some of these tools. Some of this stuff we won't get to because it's of debatable usefulness, but there's always a case where you might need to do something with some of this. So that's the Insert tab. The Page Layout tab, primarily it allows you to dictate how your spreadsheets are going to look if you decide to print them out, or to do certain other things related to visual aspects, kind of the layout, those sorts of things. And so you can, that's what's here on the page layout tab. We'll probably touch on this briefly, but these days we don't tend to print out the spreadsheets just an awful lot, so we probably won't dig too deep on that. The formulas tab allows you to, basically gives you a little reference guide that you can use to find the information that you need about formulas. Formulas are the power tools of Excel. They're really useful and they're not as scary as they look. We're going to be we're going to be doing some formulas toward the end of class even today. And we're definitely going to talk a significant amount about formulas in subsequent sessions. So the reason I introduced that in part one is I want to go ahead and get folks used to it and make sure that like, maybe it looks a little intimidating, but really it's great. You'll find these very useful. So one of the things that's happening here, functions are the building blocks of formulas. There are a bunch of functions built into Excel and no one expects you to remember them all. So if you need to look one up, they're organized by categories here and you can just look it up. It's super easy, very useful. The data tab, get out of here, Excel. Data tab allows you to organize the information that's in your workbook, as well as bring in information from outside sources. We're not going to go into that a great deal, but we are going to talk about some of these functions here. The review tab allows you to collaborate with other people on your workbook, allows you to protect certain parts of your workbook, which we'll be talking about in, I want to say part 3, but I'm not 100% sure because the material is organized a little bit differently this time. Part 2 or part 3, we'll talk about some of this stuff. The view tab changes how you see your workbook without changing the actual content of it. So there's a bunch of things here. Obviously, Zoom is here and a number of other useful bits and pieces. There's a help tab here. If you need help with Excel, you can find the documentation here and you can contact support if you're having a technical problem and stuff like that. I happen to have an Acrobat tab because Adobe Acrobat's installed on my computer, but you're probably not going to have that and we're not going to go into that. And then finally, over here on the left is the File tab. If I click on that, it gives me this area called the Backstage. We're not going to spend a ton of time on the Backstage, but basically this allows you to manage the files on your computer or manage the file aspects of your workbook rather than dealing with the contents of it. So you have save and save as, which we talked about. You have the ability to print. You can share with folks online, either via email or through various online storage services. You can export to a different file format. This publish, I think, is another Adobe thing. Don't click on it, but there's close, which will allow you to close the file that you're working on without closing Excel altogether. You can create a new file from here. You can open an existing file somewhere else on your computer. And if you need to change the default settings of Excel, you have this options option. That I haven't found I needed to do very much. So don't, I mean, you can look around in there, see if there's anything useful, but it's not a particularly, I haven't found myself needing to change the default options of Excel very much at all. Oh yeah, to get out of the file tab, the Backstage here, you click this left arrow at the top. All right, so now let's talk about, what's down here underneath. So we've got our, so this is kind of our main work area. Over here where it says A1 on my screen right now, this is what's called the name box. Don't worry about it for now. We'll come back to it. All you really need to know for now is that this will show you which cell you have selected. And so, so that's all we need to worry about for now. But there's something really useful that does that we'll talk about, I believe, in part 2. Next to that is the formula bar. The formula bar here is where you type in formulas that will be inside your cells. We'll talk about that toward the end of the session. The main thing to know about it for now is whatever's stored inside a particular cell is going to show up here in the formula bar. And then down here, this is our actual spreadsheet. Of course, you probably know Excel is a spreadsheet program. I will say, though, just for the sake of clarification and just so that you know when you see this terminology around, Excel files are actually not technically referred to as spreadsheets. They contain spreadsheets, but an Excel file is actually called a workbook. The reason being, if you think about the difference between a book and a sheet, if you have an Excel workbook, it can contain multiple spreadsheets, or Excel usually just calls them sheets, in a single file. So in this particular case of our example file, we have a sheet called Sandbox, and then we have another sheet down here called Basic Math. And I can switch between them just by clicking the little tabs down here. And of course, you'll see there's different information on the Basic Math sheet than there is on the Sandbox sheet, which is empty. So your sheets or your spreadsheets in Excel, these little tabs represent them. You can always add more by clicking the plus sign here. And then down here at the bottom are a few little things, but basically the main stuff is there's a zoom button right down here. If I click on that, I can drag to the right or to the left. If I drag to the right a little bit, I can zoom in on my workbook, which I actually will do. If I go over to the left, then I can zoom out a little bit. Or I can click these plus and minus buttons. All right, so that's all of the other stuff. Let's get into the meat of the thing. Let's actually open up our, let's actually get into the, into entering information so that we can, well, so we can use our spreadsheet. So over here, I'm going to, well, let's talk first about selecting cells. Selecting cells is pretty straightforward. All I need to do to select a cell is just click on it with a regular mouse button. Or if I prefer, a nice way to do it is using the keyboard. So I can use the up, down, left, and right keys on my keyboard, the little arrow keys, and that'll allow me to move around from cell to cell. Whichever cell I've selected has this little green border around it. And you'll notice, as I mentioned up at the top, it has the name of the cell right here. And that's kind of the essence of a spreadsheet. You have columns and you have rows. And each cell has kind of a name or an address, sort of, you might say, which is determined by which column it's in and which row it's in. You can insert and remove columns and rows, but there can only ever be like one column A, one column B, one column C, one row 1, one row 2, and one row 3. So, so it'll always be in order this way, even if the data gets moved around. If you ever played Battleship, you'll be familiar with this. This particular cell is called C6 because it's in column C and it's on row 6. This cell is H2 because it's in column H and on row 2. This one is in column F and on row 11, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how you select cells. Super duper easy. Nothing much to that there. If you want to insert some data in your cells, and I'm sure you do, what you'll want to do is just select it, and then you can start typing. So Once I start typing, you'll notice I'm typing here. I've got my little cursor, the blinking line here. And I've also got the information up here in the formula bar. So that'll be interesting a little bit later on. For now, I just want to point it out. In order to confirm that this is what I want inside the cell, I can do a number of different things. Number one, I can press enter. That's probably the most common way. I'll type it in and then I'll just press enter. What that does is it moves, or it confirms whatever I typed in the cell, and it moves my selection down to row 3 here. And so if I want something else in cell B3, I'll just press enter again, and that confirms it. I can also use the tab key. So I'll type something in and I'll press tab on my keyboard. And that's going to confirm what I typed, and it's going to move my selection to the right one cell. Now, in certain situations, it'll actually do a kind of a carriage return, and it'll move your selection to the next row, to the first column of the next row. Usually that's not going to be the case, though. Usually pressing tab will just move your selection one column to the right. Another option is to click elsewhere. So if I type in a cell here, and then I just click in another one, it moves my selection to that cell, and it confirms what I typed there. If I type something in, but I decide I don't want that in the cell, or if I'm making changes and I want to cancel those, we'll come back to that in a second. So I'll type something in that I don't want to keep. The easiest way to cancel changes in a cell or cancel entering data in a cell is just to press the escape key, ESC, at the top left of your keyboard. So escape, when I press that, it puts the cell back the way it was before. Another option to confirm and to cancel is once I start typing something, I can click this check mark here. That will actually confirm it without moving my selection. So I'll still have this cell selected, but that'll confirm what I've typed in. Or I can click this X to cancel, and that works pretty much exactly the same way as pressing escape on my keyboard. So either of those are good ways to go. Okay, so let's say I want to change what I've typed in a particular cell. No big deal. I can do that very easily. The way that that'll work is I can either use the formula bar, or I can double click inside the cell. If I double click, you'll notice I get the little blinking cursor wherever it was I double clicked, and I can change it however I want. I tend to, if I'm making changes like this, I tend to use the formula bar more often than not, because there are certain situations where I might need to move my cursor, the little blinking line, a bit. And depending on weird factors, using the arrow keys on your keyboard to move the cursor may actually accidentally change which cell you have selected while you're in the middle of editing. So I don't want to be surprised by that. So I tend to select the cell by clicking it or using my arrow keys to move to it. And then I'll click up here in the formula bar, and I can edit the text up there. A couple of additional things to note about this. Well, actually, one more thing to show you. Let's say that I want to remove the contents of the cell. That's pretty easy too. All I'm going to do is click on the cell that I want to clear out, and I'm going to press delete on my keyboard. And that is just going to clear the information out of the cell. It doesn't change anything else about the cell, but it does remove the information from it. And I can put something else in there if I want. Okay, so yeah, a couple other things to note about this. One of them, in this first cell I typed, here's some data. You'll notice it kind of extended out beyond the border line of the column. And that's basically because there's no reason for it not to. When Excel can, it'll show me all the data that's in a particular cell, even if it doesn't fit sort of visually like this. So I want to point out specifically, though, that this cell B2 contains this whole phrase, here's some data, not just here's so and then half of an M. All of that stuff is inside of the, all that stuff is inside of this cell B2. The reason you can tell is when I have this cell selected, if I go up here to the and look at the formula bar, you'll notice the formula bar does say, here's some data. If I put something in this cell next to it, you'll notice now it cuts off right there on the borderline so that I don't get confused about what's stored in each cell. And that can be really handy because that way you just don't get confused. And we'll talk about how to tweak this so that I can see all of that in a sec. But I just want to point that out to you. Whatever you type in a cell, even if I paste in paragraphs of text in a particular cell, they all live in that, all those paragraphs live in that one cell unless I make some other kind of change. Okay, so we've got that. We've talked about entering data and removing data and editing the data in the cells. Let's talk about some other things that we can do with our cells here. One thing that we might want to do is to select multiple cells all at once. Sometimes that's really useful for various reasons. Actually, you know what? Let's do this slightly differently. So I've got this cell. Let's go ahead and talk about this. I've got this cell right here. It says here's some data in it, but I can only see part of what I wrote there. Let's say I want to see the whole thing. If so, that's super easy to accomplish. All I need to do is widen this column a little bit. There are a couple of ways to do that. One way is I can go up here to the top on this borderline between columns B and C. Now I have to be up here at the top. I can't be along the line somewhere else down here in the body of the sheet. I have to be at the top between the column letters. When I move my mouse there, you'll notice it turns into a little black line with two black arrows pointing left and right. If I hold down on my mouse button, then I can, while I'm holding it down, I can drag the column until it's the width that I want it to be. If it's too wide, I can drag it back the other way. There we go. Great. So that's kind of the easy manual way to do it. Another way to do it is by clicking on the column letter up here at the top, right-clicking, I should say, clicking with the right mouse button and clicking column width. So currently this column is 15.14 somethings wide. I'm not really sure what unit of measurement they're using here, but it's 15.14 whatever's wide. And if I want to make it 16 whatever's wide, I'll just change the number here and click OK or press enter. And now it's 16 whatever's wide. Great. Rows, you can do the same way. I can change the row height by dragging on this borderline between two row numbers. I can also right-click on it and go to row height and change it to whatever number I want it to be. And I can also do something else in both of those situations. Let's narrow this one down again. Okay, so I've got in this cell here some data. What I want to do is actually just widen it enough that I can see all of that. To do that, it's super easy, actually. This is a very handy shortcut that I really like to show folks. What I can do is move my mouse over this and double click on this borderline between column letter B and column letter C. So I'm double clicking rather than clicking and dragging like I did before. When I double click, it widens out my column to accommodate the widest thing that's in that column. In this case, the phrase, here's some data. And it gives me just a little extra space here, just so that I don't, just so that, so that I can visually separate it from data that's in other columns. And so that's really nice. You can widen it out to accommodate whatever the widest thing is in your column. And then you don't have to worry about like fiddling with it and making it, and trying to get it exactly the way you want it to be there. So let's see. Now let's talk about selecting groups of cells. There are 3 different ways to select groups of cells in Excel, and they're all for slightly different types of purposes. The first one, and the one that you'll probably use most often, is just dragging over a group of cells. So let's say I want to select all the cells that have something in them here. To do that, super easy. All I need to do, I'm going to move my mouse over cell B2 here, hold down with the mouse button, and then while I'm holding down, I'm going to move my mouse until I get to cell F9 down here. So I've got a nice little box, and all of these cells are selected. There's a complicated and boring reason why this cell is not shaded in white, but don't worry about that. Just know that this cell is also selected along with all of these others that are shaded. But this particular type of box has a specific name in Excel. This is what we call a range of cells. So when I have a group of cells that are all together like this with no gaps, so in this case, I've got everything from B2 to F9 in a rectangle. That is considered by Excel a range of cells. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but ranges are a really important concept. And you'll hear about it plenty. So if you're like, still don't quite get it, that's okay. We'll talk about it more as we go on and it'll be clear. But this is a range of cells, essentially a cell that forms a rectangle or actually a line, something like this or like this with no gaps in the middle. So you can select cells as a range just by holding down in the middle of a corner cell and dragging to the other corner, just like that. Another way that you can select groups of cells together is by selecting whole columns and or whole rows. So let's say I want columns B through F selected. To do that, I'm going to go up here to the column letter or thereabouts, and you'll notice my mouse pointer turns into a black arrow pointing down. I'll hold down with the mouse button and I'll drag over until I reach column F, and then I'll let go. That selects all of columns B through F. So if I want to make a change, like the types of changes that we'll talk about in just a moment, if I make a change right now with all of these selected, the change will apply to every cell in all 5 of those columns. So you want to be a little careful with this, but it's really useful sometimes. Rows, same deal. If I move over here to the left, you'll see when I move over the row numbers, I have a black arrow pointing to the right. I'll drag down, and now I've got rows 2 through 9 selected. So that's another way. And by the way, these are technically considered to be a range in Excel as well. That's another way you can select multiple cells at the same time. The third way is you can select individual cells manually. So what I'm going to do is click on cell. I'm going to select only the cells that have stuff in them. So I've clicked on cell B2 to select it. And now I'm going to hold down the control key in the bottom left of my keyboard, CTRL. If you're on a Mac, I believe you'll use the command key instead, but I'm holding it down. And I'm going to click on cell C2, cell B3, cell B4, and cell F9 here. So all 5 of those cells are selected, but no other cells. That allows you to select cells individually. In Excel terminology, this is not considered to be a range of cells. And the reason for that is there's a gap here. None of these cells in the middle are selected, only these particular 5. So that's why this is not considered to be a range, but I can make certain changes and apply them to all of those cells really easily. Okay, so so we've talked about selecting multiple cells at once. Let's talk about another thing that you might want to do, and that is text formatting. So when you select a cell, or if you're about to type some information into a cell, you may want to change kind of how it looks ever so slightly or a lot, depending on your needs, I guess. So I'm going to select this cell that says here's some data. And up at the top here, I've been on this help tab. I'm going to click on the home tab up at the top, and that's going to take me to all of these commands here. We're going to talk just briefly about text formatting. The main reason being, if you've used email or Microsoft Word, you're probably familiar with a lot of these controls. So I don't think there's much sense in kind of belaboring them. But we will touch on this briefly because obviously it's something you want to know. I did get a question from someone just now. What if I want to select a range of cells to print? Do I follow the same way? Kind of. I'll show you how that works really quick. Great question. And then we'll talk about the text formatting. So if you want to select some cells to print, what you'll do is go to the page layout tab up here at the top, and then you'll click on print area, and you'll click set print area. Whoops, sorry, the opposite of that. So first you want to select a group of cells, a range. There we go. Let's say I want to print these cells from A1 to F20 here. I'll select those cells, then I'll click print area and click set print area. Nothing really happens except when I deselect this, you'll notice there's a little faint extra line here. That tells me that this is the print area that I've designated. And if I go up here to File and click on Print, then you'll notice those are the ones that show up in the print preview. One thing to bear in mind about printing your spreadsheets is that, well, the grid lines between cells do not print by default. Sometimes you don't want them to print, but sometimes you might. So if you want to print this, so if you want to print the grid lines, what you'll do is come down here to the bottom and click on Page Setup. And then click on Sheet. And go to Grid Lines. Check Grid Lines underneath Print here. I'm going to click OK. Now it'll show me the grid lines. There's another thing related to that, but that I'll show you in a minute. But for now, that's the main stuff. Another question here from someone. You may have touched on this and I missed it, but how do I make a cell wider but keep all of the other cells their original size? So actually we will, if I'm understanding the question correctly, we will talk about that in a minute. Unless you do the other thing that I'm about to talk about in a sec, though, if you widen, you can't widen an individual cell without widening the rest of the cells in that column. Every other cell on the sheet that's outside of that column will stay the same. But if you widen or narrow a particular cell, the only way you can do that is by changing the width of the entire column. But there's another way to have a larger cell that I'll show you in a minute. Okay, cool. So let's talk about this text formatting first before we get there. Up here, now that I've got this cell selected, I'm on the Home tab. Up here at the top, you'll notice it says, or you'll notice there are several options here in this font area of the Home tab. So we've got Calibri, that's the default font. The way that, in case you're not familiar with the terminology, a font is the way that your letters, numbers, and symbols look, the design of them, basically. So Calibri is the default font at least in this particular version of Excel. So that's what's selected right now. If I go down here, I can find something else like this one. And hey, there we go. Now I've got kind of this more scribbly, look to my characters instead. I can also change the size of the text. So right now it's 11 point, which is kind of standard business font size. But I could bump it up to, say, 22. And then I get much larger characters. Or I could bring it down as low as 8, or even lower if I click and type something in. So if I go to 5 and press enter, then I can make it real tiny. So you can change the font size that way. You can also use these A buttons right here to change it incrementally. So clicking the large A with the up arrow makes your text larger. Clicking the down A with the down arrow, or the small a with the down arrow, makes your text smaller. You've got bold, you've got italics, you've got underlining, and you can also click this drop-down box and change it to a double underline if you decide you want to do that. Notice when I do that, before I had just a U with a single underline underneath it right here as the button. If I click on the drop-down and I change it to double underline though, then that becomes the default. So if I click in another cell and I go up here to underline, clicking the little D here will just double underline it for me straight away. Clicking the drop-down arrow, though, I can select the regular single underline instead. So it all, which one you have up here depends on essentially which one you used last. And that way you can quickly get to the one that you used last again if you need to. Okay, so let's skip over this for a moment. We'll come back to that very soon. Next to that, though, are a couple of additional things. We have our cell fill color. If I click on the paint bucket with the yellow swatch, you'll notice it just fills in the background of my cell with yellow. That's the cell's fill color. If I click on the drop-down arrow next to it, though, I could choose a different color, or I can even click more colors down here and mix my own if I want to get real fancy. For now, though, let's go with this. All right, I've got kind of a nice light green here. And again, just like we had with the underlining, you'll notice the light green becomes the default. So if I want that color again, all I have to do is click in the cell and then click it, and it fills it right in for me. So that makes it pretty easy to fill in another cell with color if you want. Similarly, next to that, we have this A with the red swatch. If I click on that, then it turns my text red. If I click the drop-down arrow next to it, then I can choose a color for my text. In this case, I'll choose blue. And now again, blue becomes the default color. So I can apply that to a different cell with one click. And then I can use the drop-down again to get back to where I want to be. One other thing to note about this, if you fill in a cell with a particular color and you want to change it back so that it looks like the other cells around it, you want to make sure, so a lot of folks, myself included, are sometimes tempted. If you click the little drop-down arrow here, you'll notice white is right there as a color. But if I click it, you'll notice it kind of covers up the border lines between the cells there. What I actually want to do is click on this again and click no fill. And that's gonna say whatever essentially the background color of the spreadsheet is, just use that rather than filling it in with a particular color, even white. And that way you get, if you want the cells to look the way that they did before, that's how you do it rather than filling it with white. Okay, so let's see. Let's see. Oh yeah, one other thing here in this font area that I want to touch on just briefly, and that's this borders button. If I use this borders button, what it's going to do is allow me to create borders around a cell or a group of cells. So if I've got this cell selected and I click the bottom border button, which is the default here, then when I click somewhere else, you'll notice it fills it in with a black line rather than the standard gray line. So now I have a border on one edge of the cell. If I click the drop down arrow, I could also add a top border. And now I have a border on two sides of the cell. I could also add left and right here, but let's say I don't actually want the top border after all. I'll click top border again. Oh, right. Oh, hang on. Oh, it's not going to let me do that. Okay, that's cool. Anyway, so did I not? Yeah, okay. So I can add borders around the cell. If I select multiple cells, clicking, say, the bottom border button will only add a bottom border to the bottom of the whole selection, not each individual cell, the bottom of the whole selection. Same thing if I do top border here. Again, only the top border of the whole selection gets filled in. If I click no border, then it'll remove all the borders on the cells that I have selected. You can do other stuff like all borders. If I have a bunch of cells selected and I click all borders, then I get the whole thing. I can do outside borders. Well, I've got to clear it out by clicking no border. I can do outside borders, which will put a border around the full outside of whatever I have selected. Thick outside borders, or thick box border as it's sometimes called. That'll put borders around a thick border around the whole thing, and so on and so forth. You have like a gazillion options about borders here. Two reasons that you might want to use this feature. Reason number one is if you are you can use it to draw folks' attention to particular pieces of information that you want them to see. So putting a border around something is a good way to say, hey, look over here. The other thing is, if you're printing and you don't want to show all the grid lines, but you do want to show a few grid lines, you can put borders around those cells where you want the grid lines to show up, and those borders will print even if you don't turn printing grid lines on. Okay, let's see. So let's see. Let's talk about a couple of other useful formatting things here in this alignment area. And to do that, I'm going to make a cell somewhat bigger. Okay. So I've got this cell that says something else, cell B2 here. If I look up at the top here in this alignment area, you'll notice I have these 6 buttons right here. These are my alignment buttons. By default, your text, if it's just regular text and not numbers, your text will sit at the bottom left of whichever cell you type it into. So when I made this cell taller and wider, my text hugged the bottom left here. If you put in a number, excuse me, goodness, then it'll sit on the bottom right. If I want to change that though, I totally can. I've got my vertical alignment here, so I can do middle align to align it with the vertical middle of the cell, or top align to align it with the top of the cell. And I also have my horizontal ones, left, center, and right. If I want it in the exact middle of the cell, then I'll use middle align, and center. And there it is. So that'll allow you to move your text around wherever you want it to be if it's not in the exact right spot. You can rotate it. If I click this AB with the arrow, you could angle your text like this. You can make it, you could rotate it upwards or downwards. You can do this vertical text, but I find that extremely hard to read, so I'm not sure what that's used for really. And then for any of these options, if you want to turn them off, you just click the option that's you're currently using and it'll turn it off. You also have indentation here. And then these are the other options that I wanted to show you, which might be what you were asking about earlier when you were talking about making a cell wider, but keeping all the other cells the same size. So let's see. Let's say I make, okay, cool. Okay, so I've got kind of a longer thing here. We're actually running over into two other columns in addition to the one that it started in. So if I want my audience to be able to see this whole sentence, I can do it a couple of different ways. And those are right here in this area. The first one is wrap text. If I click on that, what it's going to do is it will take my text and rather than let it just kind of run out forever from left to right, instead it's going to create lines for text inside of my cell. So if I add something additional, then it'll also make extra room for that. You probably want to widen it out just a smidge. And so that allows me to preserve my horizontal space as much as possible. So if I don't care about, if I don't care so much about vertical space, but I want to make sure my columns stay the same width, then I can turn on text wrapping for a particular cell or for an entire column or an entire row. And that will allow me to keep the width of the column the same, but also make sure that I can see everything that's contained in that cell, in that column. So that's pretty useful sometimes, depending on whether horizontal space or vertical space is more precious at a given moment. If I want to turn it off for a cell, I'll just click wrap text again, and there it is. Okay, so another option here is, let's say I want to make this, I want to have all this space be a single cell that contains this sentence, and I don't want to affect the widths of my columns or my row heights, either one. That is also possible. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this cell and the other ones too, just like this. And then I'm going to click on Merge and Center up here. When I do that, what's happened is when I click on this, you'll notice it selects this whole thing. What's happened is Excel has taken these 5 cells, H6 through L6, and it's merged them into one giant sort of supercell. And so now I can have this whole sentence on screen. I don't need a taller row, and I don't need a wider column. Everything's, all of that stuff is exactly the same, but this sentence is here, and I can see it. Most often, this this option is used for things like titles, where the where you want the information to be visible. Maybe you want it to be in a bigger font, and of course you can do this. You don't just have to do it on one row. You can make a cell out of a whole range of cells on multiple rows and in multiple columns. So for something like a title, you want it to show up, but you don't want to have to work your column widths around a title. That doesn't make sense. You want your column widths to be the best width for the actual data that's in your spreadsheet. So that's what merge and center allows you to do, and makes it a little bit easier. So if you have a cell that's merged and you want it to be unmerged, that's pretty easy too. All I have to do is select it and click merge and center. Any changes that you make, like the color of the cell, the font size, the color of the text, those sorts of things will apply to all of the cells that once were a part of the merged cell. So if I unmerge them like I just did, and then I go down here to cell L9, the text inside of it and the color of the cell will be exactly the same as what they were back when the cells were merged. So just know that going in, and that way you're not surprised. All right, so we're gonna do one additional thing that's a little bit different sort of topic, and then we're actually gonna flip over to our basic math sheet for the other examples for the rest of the class. Before we do that, what questions do y'all have for me about what we talked about so far? Oh, and did I answer the question about making a cell wider also? Okay, there's a raised hand thing there. Let's see. Is that a yes raised hand, or is that a question raised hand? Okay, cool. It's all good. All right, excellent. Okay, great. If y'all do think of any questions, just ask anytime, and I'll be happy to tackle those. Okay, cool. So let's talk really quickly about number formatting. Number formatting is a really cool feature of Excel. It's something that they're expanding shortly. Someone's just asking, how do you change the default font? That's a good question. So the default font you would change by going to, over here, you click on page layout, and you can select a theme here, or if you're just strictly changing the default font, you click on fonts and you click customize fonts right here, and you can select a different set of fonts, and those will be sort of those will be the default, at least for this particular workbook. And let's see, I wonder, I'm not sure off the top of my head how you would choose a default font for like every future workbook, but that'll at least work for the one. That's interesting. Let's see. Okay, cool. So let's talk about number formats. Number formats, this is something that Microsoft has expanded on recently. I haven't even gotten to dig into the interesting stuff that it looks like they're doing with that, but it seems pretty cool. They're adding a bunch of additional ways you can sort of that you can change your or that you can modify the different types of data that you put in cells and stuff. But for now, let's just stick with this. This is, this is definitely the most useful stuff, and you can kind of, you can do a lot with this. Okay, so let's say that I am keeping track of my expenses. Let's say I spent $5 one day, And then I made another purchase and I spent 2031. Whoops. Well, let's go with 3031 then. Let's say I spent $8 another time, and let's say it was $15 another time. Okay, so I've got kind of a mess here. Basically, I have right here, I've got kind of a standard dollar amount, $, dollar amount, dollar amount, period, and then the cents after it. This one I've got almost right, but I don't have the $sign. This one I've got the $sign, but I don't have any decimal point or amount of cents after that. And this one's just an unsigned number with no decimal point, just kind of hanging out there. So I did this a little sloppy on purpose, but I can actually change this so that it'll all look right, and I won't have to fiddle with $signs and possibly even decimal points if I'm putting something in this column. To do that, I'm going to select the whole column by clicking the column letter, in this case N, and then going up to this drop-down menu at the top where it says General and selecting Currency. When I do that, you'll notice it formats everything exactly the right way. So I've got for each amount, I've got a $sign, the dollar amount, the decimal point, and then 2 decimal places after that for the cents. So, and if I type in something else like 42 and press enter, then it just automatically converts it to that because I've changed the number format in this whole column to currency. Now, of course, you can change the number format for individual cells. That's perfectly fine, and in some cases, it's what you need to do. But in this case, since I'm only putting dollar amounts in this column, changing the whole column to be the currency format just makes sense. And that way, I don't have to fiddle with changing it or with being so exact about how I type in the number, and it cuts down on mistakes too. Let's see, let's add some dates to these. And let's see. Oops, what happened there? Oh, goodness. Bad at typing today. All right. So Excel does detect certain types of dates, and let's see. And it'll automatically convert them to this weird format that I don't like. Maybe this is something that they use in accounting. I'm not 100% sure, but it'll show you the day number and then a little dash and then the name of the month, or I guess a 3-letter abbreviation. Obviously, May is 3 letters anyway for the month. There we go. Okay. And so what I want to do is I actually want to have it, I don't like this format at all. So I actually want to have it all in this format right here, month/day/year. To do that, again, I'm going to go up here to the top and I'm going to select the column. And then I'm going to go to the drop-down box here where it says General right now and click on Short Date. What that does is convert all of these dates to that same format. And if I type in, September 10th, then it actually converts it. Now, it will, unless you specify a year, Excel will default to whatever year it is. So when I typed in September 10th, it put in 2020 because it figured that's what I meant. So you want to watch that if you're entering dates from multiple years, or if it's, if it's December or if it's January, you want to watch that. But this can be really useful for, again, keeping your stuff standardized so that everything reads properly and you're able to easily get to the information you want. I could convert it to long date, and that's going to give me Thursday, May 21st, 2020, Saturday, June 13th, 2020, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of cool. And then there are a bunch of other number formats as well. So there's time, there's percentages, fractions, scientific notation, and then text. I tend to avoid this text format because if you have a formula in a cell and it's in that text format, then the formula won't work properly. So you want to make really sure that you're only going to put just plain old text in the cell and nothing else. And I tend to just leave it as general and avoid that altogether. You can even click more number formats, and there are a bunch there, but we're running a little lower on time, so I want to make sure that we get to other stuff. One quick thing that I do want to show you, though, in addition to this, or in addition with this, before we completely move on, is I'm going to select this column and I'm going to go up here and click on number as my format. The number format changes any numbers that it finds in those cells to a number with 2 decimal places. So you'll see we have 0.00 after each of these. And you'll notice it converted my dates into a weird situation here. Instead of normal dates, what I have here is 43,972.00. The reason for this is when you store a date in Excel, it works a little bit differently from what you might expect. When you store a date in Excel, what it does is it stores a serial number that counts the number of days from January 1st, 1900 to whatever the date is that you're actually putting in the cell. So in the case of this one, we've got, so this was May 21st of 2020. That date was the 43,972nd day from January 1st, 1900. The reason that's useful to know is when we talk about using dates in formulas next week, it's very handy because you can add and subtract dates just like you would any other number. So I can literally subtract, if I want to find out how many days there were between May 21st and today, I can literally subtract May 21st from November 3rd, 2020, and I'll get that number of days. So that's pretty handy. And it's kind of fun to see. So just wanted to show you that. Let's go ahead and click on, well, any questions about that before we move on to the other couple of examples here? Cool. If you do have questions, again, let me know and we'll do it. We'll figure it out. Okay, so I'm going to click down here on the basic math sheet. One thing to bear in mind if you're editing the contents of a cell, if you have the little blinking cursor here in a cell or up here in the formula bar, you definitely want to cancel that edit. So click Escape or press this X before you switch over to the basic math sheet. Otherwise, weird things will happen. Okay, cool. So here we are on the basic math sheet, and we're going to do a couple of pretty useful things. One of those, we're going to talk about sorting and filtering. So in this particular example, I'm doing some sort of like a side business or whatever. I have a bunch of salespeople reporting to me, but they don't always check in. And in fact, I haven't heard from some of them in quite a while. So I want to be able to look at how my business is going, essentially. But everything's just sort of thrown in here. There are a bunch of different names and a bunch of different dates and a bunch of different dollar amounts. And it's hard to find anything really in this whole list. So what I want to do is I want to sort these out in a useful way and maybe even take out some of the data that I don't really need right now. To do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on one of these cells just anywhere in this whole business. So essentially any cell from A3 to D29, any of those cells there, I want to click on one of them to select it. And then I want to go up here to the top, kind of towards the right, and find where it says sort and filter. Click on that and click filter. If everything worked properly, what should happen is you should see a drop-down arrow next to the name heading, the date heading, the income heading, and the expenses heading. Because what Excel has done is it's identified essentially this like clump of data and said, okay, all this stuff goes together, and it's going to allow us to sort it out and filter it. So one quick thing that I could do just to make it easy to find an individual salesperson's numbers would be to sort it out alphabetically. To do that, I'm going to click the arrow next to name and click sort A to Z. When I do that, Antoinette is at the top and Zeke is down here at the bottom. If I click on the drop-down arrow next to date, I can sort it oldest to newest or newest to oldest. So if I click newest to oldest, I can see Antoinette is the person who has contacted me most recently. And Rupali is the person who contacted me the longest ago. So might want to check in with him, make sure he's okay and everything. Because I haven't heard from him in, wow, like 10 years. So we've got, so I can sort that out. That way, let's see who the largest earner is. If I click sort largest to smallest, I can see the person who's brought in the most income for the business is Zeke with $3,089.39. The person who's brought in the least is Janet with only $108.32. So, and you'll notice each row of data moves together as long as there's an arrow above that column. So when I sort alphabetically, all of the information from Zeke, it says, or it's 7/3/2019, income or income 3,089, and expenses 1445. If I sort it out A to Z, then all of that moves together down here at the bottom. So so that's really useful. You keep all your data together on the same rows, but you can sort through it so that you can find the stuff that you need. If I want to filter something, let's say I go up here to the top. Let's say I want to filter out everybody whose dates are from, let's say I only want to see people whose dates are 2018 or later. To do that, I'm going to click the drop-down arrow next to date, and I'm going to click on, and I'm going to uncheck the boxes down here next to the other years. Or I could uncheck the select all box, and then I could just check 2020, 2019, and 2018. I'll click OK. And now I've temporarily removed the data from my view. You'll notice over here with the row numbers, there are some row numbers that are skipped, and all the row numbers are blue. So my data isn't missing. It's just been filtered out temporarily so I can no longer see it. If I want to get it back, no big deal. I'll either click here where the little funnel is and click clear filter from date, or I can go up here and click clear under sort and filter, and that will show all of the information again. So sorting and filtering, super handy. You can use it to easily sort of weed through your data and find the information you're looking for and organize it the way you want it organized. Okay, so I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to sort largest to smallest on the income number and put the top salespeople at the top. And now let's shift gears into our final example here. Our final example is going to be your first formula. So I want to, or your first couple of formulas. I want to show you these, but we are going to do a bit of a refresher at the beginning of next week's class. So if you're concerned at all about, if you're like, I still don't quite get it, don't worry about it. We're gonna talk about it a lot more, and and you'll have plenty of chances to ask any questions that you have, to practice it. You'll get the hang of it, I promise. Okay, so here we go. Let's write our first formula in Excel. I'm going to click over here in cell F4. And since I'm sorting by the income number with my top earner at the top, what I want to do is just whoever the top earner is, I want to have their name appear right here in cell F4. To do that, we're going to write a pretty simple formula. So I'm going to click on the cell to select it. And then I'm going to go up here and click in the formula bar at the top. Now, it's not actually technically necessary to click in the formula bar up here, but it's a lot easier to correct mistakes if you're typing your formulas in the formula bar rather than typing them down here in the cell in the body of the sheet. So I tend to, whenever I'm writing a formula, click in that formula bar to type it in. So I'll click up there. I've got my little blinking cursor right there. I'll hit the equal sign. The equal sign gives, as the first thing in your cell, gives Excel a signal that what it's about to see is a formula. It's the way that Excel is signaled that, hey, there's a formula coming up. So whenever you have a formula, you always start with an equal sign. If you do everything else right in the formula and you write just a beautiful formula that would make the developers of Excel just cry for joy, but you don't have an equal sign at the beginning, it's not really a formula and it's not going to work. Conversely, if you type something into your cell that starts with an equal sign, Excel is going to assume it's a formula, whether that's what you intended or not. So always start a formula with an equal sign and never start anything else with an equal sign. So them's the rules in Excel. All right, we got our equal sign here. And then I'm just going to type in A4. A4 is just the address of the cell. You'll notice the cell, that A4 is color-coded in blue up here, and cell A4 is also color-coded in blue over here on the left-hand side. That tells me, or that color coding allows me to see that I'm actually pointing to the right cell, and I am. So I'm just going to press enter to lock in that formula. Excuse me, and lo and behold, here in cell F4, it says Zeke, and it says Zeke over here. If I were to change it to like Zach or something and press enter, you'll notice that cell F4 also changes. So what this formula does is it tells Excel, hey, whatever's over there, put it over here too. Whatever's in cell A4 needs to be in cell F4. This is called a cell reference. When you type in the address of a cell like A4 or B11 or whatever, it grabs whatever's in that cell and it puts it into the calculation that it's doing in your formula. So let's do one more formula here, and then we'll wrap it up and tackle any last questions that y'all have. Okay, for our last formula, what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the total income from all of our salespeople here. I'm going to click in cell C2 up at the top, and when I do, and then once I've done that, I'm going to click up here in the formula bar again, press equals to tell Excel to expect a formula. And then I'm going to type the word sum, S-U-M. So that's sum as in the answer to an addition problem, not sum as in some chickens. So S-U-M. And then I'll open a set of parentheses next to that word sum. What that's going to do is it's actually going to tell, it's actually going to use the, it's going to invoke one of those functions that I mentioned earlier. Functions are kind of the building blocks of Excel, or I mean of formulas in Excel. So you use functions to build a formula. In this case, the sum function, all it does is add stuff together. It does addition. So I type the word sum, I open a set of parentheses. So I put a left parenthesis in case that's not clear. You hold shift while pressing 9 on your keyboard. And then I'm being prompted. So I need at least one number or set of numbers inside of my parentheses here. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to point it to the cells from, or I'm going to point it to the cells that have the income numbers in them. So that'll start with cell C4. So C4. And then I'm going to put a colon. So to do that, you'll hold shift while pressing the semicolon key. So it's 2 dots, not a dot comma thing, semicolon. So C4, regular colon, not semicolon. And then on the other side of the colon, I'm actually going to type C100. And you'll notice my color coding comes down here and it highlights all of these cells. We'll talk about why I did it this way in just a sec. But for now, I just want to point out this is how you point in a formula or reference a range of cells, like we talked about earlier. A range of cells is a group of cells that forms either a line or a box with no gaps. So when we want to say this is a range of cells, then we type usually the top corner cell address and the top left corner cell address and the bottom right corner cell address. So in this case, the top cell is C4, the bottom cell is C100, and that tells Excel all the cells between C4 and C100. Then I'm going to close my parentheses. In computer world, whenever you have a left parenthesis, you got to have a right one. So I'm going to hold shift and press 0 to close my parentheses. And you'll notice for a moment, both parentheses go bold. So I know that they go together, that I've closed this set of parentheses. Then I'm going to press enter. And you'll see my total income number here, $28,727.68. So what I told Excel was go down here, add up all the cells in this range from C4 to C100, and then give me the total or the sum of all of those numbers, $28,727.68. So you did it. You've already written 2 formulas in Excel, and you're doing great. Awesome. Thank you all so much. Y'all have a great rest of the day. Again, go vote if you haven't already, and I'll look forward to seeing y'all next time.